Yep, you can see them.
Okay, you can see them, right? Okay. Okay, this is basically a story about a person by the name of John Blunt. Okay, John Blunt actually came from not a very wealthy family, but he was a very ambitious person. Not surprisingly, if you had a chance later to dig on his history, he has this motto in life: think big. Okay, and I think with that introduction, you know where I'm leading to now. So the story happened, or the incident happened in about 300 years ago, just over 300 years ago, 1719, in London, England. Starting from a humble background, John Blunt worked his way up and he established several businesses. And he eventually became the lead director in one company, which is, I shouldn't say famous, but rather notorious in history. And the company is known as the South Sea Company. Okay. This is a company that was established back in the 1700, early 1700. But eventually what happened was, there was a lot of things that happened then. But eventually what happened was the South Sea Company made a deal with the British government. Masa itu, the UK wasn't yet in existence, of course. The UK was known as Great Britain then, right? Okay, so the company made a deal with the British government. And what was the deal? The deal was, okay, the king then, King George the First, would give the monopoly right to South Sea Company to handle all British trade in South America. So in other words, if anyone wants to trade with South America, then they would have to go through this company, which is sounds very lucrative, right? Of course, then the Great Britain was ruling the seas, so to speak. Almost half of all world trade is handled by British merchants or people somehow related to the British government and British businessmen. So this was a particularly lucrative trade. And the deal requires John Blunt to kind of raise 31 million pounds. Now, if you want to know, if you get some idea how much is that, then now it's worth about 8 billion pounds, or about maybe 40, 45 billion ringgit today. Still not much, but this happened about 300 years ago, right? So 40 billion ringgit is definitely a lot of money, you know, then, because the economy was smaller, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that was the deal. The British government say, okay, you take over our debt amounting to 31 million pounds then, which is about 8 billion pounds today. In exchange, I'm going to give you the monopoly rights of all trades in South America. So this is the deal between the British government and the South Sea Company, of course. So what was the business model then? Well, the business model was, I think as an economist, I think the business model was initially fine. It was a good business model because what he was trying to do then was to say, okay, let me assume this 31 million pounds debt, okay, but because in exchange I had this deal with the British government that I'll get a monopoly rights over South America trade, I can then make money and start paying dividends, make some profits out of it. Okay, jadi apa dia buat? He sold shares. Okay, so he split up this 31 million pounds into bits and pieces, into small pieces of shares worth £100 each. And then he turned around and, of course, sold it to the public to finance this undertaking. So the idea here is he sold this £100 shares each, and then he would hope to raise 31 million pounds, and then from that 31 million pounds pay off the government's creditors, and then he could then go on and do business, monopoly business I must emphasize, in South America, and then from the profit, he will start paying dividends on the shareholders. Now, the problem with John Bland was that he wasn't so scrupulous. What happened was, instead of conducting business in the South American trade, he actually initiated a Ponzi scheme. Okay, a Ponzi scheme ni, kalau for some of you who, I think I'm sure many of you would still remember, there was this Pak Mantelo business where people start putting in money into his investment scheme, and then he would give out dividends, you know, not from any real business, but he will just use money that he got at a later stage, you know, to pay back the earlier investors, and then he hoped to perpetuate this forever. But of course, it is a pyramid scheme, you know, that you have to have more and more people investing, and eventually, because there are only a finite number of investors, you end up having the pyramid collapsing. So what I have there is of course, I think there wasn't pictures then, you know, back in the early 1700s. So this is like an artist's impression of people actually selling these shares in the street. Okay, so because he was giving dividends, and hefty dividends, huge dividends, from later investors, so the shares became popular. This is like saying you invest your money, say 1,000 ringgit, so you get like 1,100 ringgit a month from the day when you first invested, right? So the return was very attractive, and he was able to do this because he was actually running what I call a Ponzi scheme, right? Okay, and there at the bottom there is also I think it was a share certificate. I think they preserve it. I think you can find this in somewhere in some museum in the UK, I guess. This was the actual certificate for 1,800 pounds. You know, somebody invested 1,800 pounds initially in this South Sea company. Okay, that was his business model. So he had good intention at the beginning. He wanted to run a proper business, you know, practically borrow money from investors, run a profitable business in South America, and then use the profits to pay dividends to the investors. The government should also be happy because he assumed the 31 million pounds debt owned by the British government. By the way, I must also say that being a student of economic history, that what's happening in the UK back in the 1700, early 1700, exactly what's happening now, today, for the US. You know, the British government becomes more and more indebted, just like the American governments today. So the scenario is fairly similar. But okay, that's beside the point for today. Okay, that was his business model. Eventually, he kind of got, shall I say, diverted, because he thought that he could run a Ponzi scheme and along the way make himself rich. Okay. If you look at bullet number 3 there on the screen, what happened was, because the return was so good, so he became attracting a lot of investors. Okay. Now, he attracted investors from all walks of life, including the king. Okay. So what happened was, in the early, I think it was the late 1719, even King George I invested 100,000 pounds of his own money in this venture. If you want to get a sense of how much is that 100,000 pounds, it's about 25 million today. And the chart on the left shows you what happens to the share prices from when it was first sold in 1719 until it eventually collapsed in 1720. So if you were to be an investor when it was first sold to the public, when the shares were first sold to the public, then you stand to make, if you sell, if you were to sell at the peak price, right? So if you can see on the screen here, like it started out at about 100 ringgit, right? So if you were to sell at the peak of about 1,000, so you make a tenfold kind of profit. So it was very lucrative. What the thing that makes it so good was, in the months leading to the peak, right? Prices was really rising very fast. In Malaysia, we had this situation starting from the mid 1990s, up until maybe 1997, for two and a half years, when share prices rose very quickly. So the atmosphere was like that, so you can just put in some money and your money will double, within a space of 1 or 2 months. So that was the atmosphere. So everybody was attracted to this, and even the king invested 100,000 pounds of his own money, which is now worth about 25 million pounds. Okay. So we have a term for this in economics. We call it rational exuberance, because the situation was really exuberant, and that's why we call it rational exuberance. Just to show you what people were just going crazy then, there was this, until today you could still visit and go to this hospital. There is this hospital called the Guy's Hospital in London. And the hospital was established by a person by the name of Sir Thomas Guy, Sir Thomas Guy. And actually what happened was, he established the hospital out of some of the proceeds of the money that he made by investing in John Blunt's scheme, So he sold, this is recorded history, he sold shares which he first purchased at 54,000 pounds. So this is about what, 12 million ringgit today, maybe 10 million ringgit today. Sorry, 10 million pounds today, right? And then he sold it later for a price of 235,000 pounds, which is now worth about 60 million pounds. So I don't know how much out of that money he donated to the establishment of the hospital, but it must have been quite a substantial sum. So people were making lots of money. You invest 10 million pounds, you get, after a year you get like fivefold the amount that you originally invested in. So this guy, he actually used some of the proceeds to establish this, I think, kind of famous hospital in London even today. Okay. Now, the other story that I wanted to kind of, and there's a reason for that, I want to relate to you, is the fact that it is not just people like the king and Sir Thomas Guy and another person that I'm going to show you next were investing in this. Everybody was investing in this. So it was reported that one aristocratic lady back in the 1700s saw her former maid, MAID, housemaid, housekeepers, people who were cleaning her home, in a theater, and she was occupying a more expensive seats in the theater than herself. So I tried to find in the internet. I saw like that was how an 18th century theater in London looks like. So everybody was making, inverted comma, making some money, and some of them, of course, as Sir Thomas Guy's story indicated, like some people were making lots and tons of money, right? So everybody was, inverted comma, was gaining ground. They were earning a lot of returns from their inverted comma investment. And you could have situations in which a former housemaid, people who involved in cleaning and cooking at other people's homes, making investment and becoming rather wealthy out of that investment. Now, the story of the next person, which is related to this investment, of course, is extremely important. And that's, in fact, the point that I'm trying to, several points that I'm going to make today actually relates to this next person. The next person that you had on the screen is Sir Isaac Newton. I personally have not met him, obviously. I've seen many pictures of him. Some were saying that this is not Sir Isaac Newton, but you know, if you Google Sir Isaac Newton image in Google, you find that there might be some variations to his portrait, but I think this is the one most common that you can see. So this is Sir Isaac Newton. And he was in the 1700, early 1700, was already a famous scientist. Not just now, but even then, he was already a famous scientist. He was in his early 70s when he decided to actually invest in John Blunt's scheme. So this is like sekarang ni macam, this is like saying a professor, very senior professor in UKM investing in Pak Mantelo's pyramid scheme, Ponzi scheme, right? But this is even more. This is Sir Isaac Newton, you know, the most famous scientist, the most brilliant scientist. Some people say ever, although I don't necessarily agree with that. But he was a brilliant scientist, very methodical, very scientific in his thinking and all that. But he decided to invest. And how much did he invest? He invested £7,000 initially. Okay, and that is his life savings. £7,000. If you want to convert that into today's money, is about 1.5 million pounds today, or 6 million ringgit today, which is, I think, a substantial sum for a person, for an individual. Now, he actually, because he's a physicist, right? So he knew that everything that goes up will eventually comes down, right? So he decided in July of 1720, this is around about the peak of the just before the peak of the share prices. He decided to actually sold his shares, and he got £20,000 for it. So which is equivalent to about 5 million pounds today, or 25, 26 million ringgit today in Malaysian ringgit. A respectable sum, of course, for a person who started out with 1.5 million investment, and eventually earning 3.5 million pounds return, therefore getting a total of 5 million pounds when he got out of it. However, strangely enough, at least, of course, this is we have the benefit of hindsight. We could say, like, strangely enough, right? 1 month after that, in August 1720, he reinvested the entire sum that he got, which was 20,000 pounds, which is 5 million pounds today, right? So he reinvested that sum that he got back in July 1720, and of course, as I have indicated earlier, the scheme eventually collapsed. Okay, but when did the scheme collapse? The scheme collapsed in September 1720, about a month later, and Sir Isaac Newton, of course, then was holding this almost worthless paper. So the value just dropped down, and the paper becomes practically worthless. Okay. So I didn't put that portrait incorrectly. I purposefully put it upside down just to indicate to you that something terrible has happened. So he was in his 70s, as I said, early 70s. reduced to near poverty. I'm not sure whether they had this pension scheme then, but I think there wasn't any kind of social safety net then, you know. So he was reduced to near poverty, leading to his famous quote. Some of you may have seen this, some of you may have not seen it, but I think it's worth reading, you know, because this is a guy, one of the most famous scientists, and he said, I can actually calculate the motions of heavenly bodies. Okay, you can do that. He did all this path-breaking Islamic, scientific discovery, right? But then he said, but I cannot understand the madness of man. Okay, and of course, the madness of man here, okay, refers to the title of my presentation today, which is financial risk, right? So here is one of the most brilliant scientists, a leading scientist of the day, you know, people who are so used to methodical thinking, people who are extremely rational and all that. But eventually he got caught up in the exuberance, rational exuberance, I call it, and eventually lost everything, leading him, as I said earlier, to say like, you know, I can do so many things, you know, like beyond even the capability of most people, calculating the motions of heavenly bodies. But I cannot really understand the manners of men, or I cannot really handle this financial risk. Okay, Dr. Mauda, I want to end with this slide, right? And perhaps later, if anybody has any questions, we can deal with those questions. What can we learn from this story? Well, there are a lot of things that we could learn from this story. I've picked up 3 things, okay? And these lessons are extremely important to all of you. It is extremely important because I know many of you, if you are not as capable or as brilliant as Sir Isaac Newton, you are the most, among the most brilliant, the most capable people in this country, and that's why you are now listening to this presentation, right? You are in this cohort of people who has done really well in schools, in life, in university, and so forth. And now you are pursuing another stage in your career, right? Becoming a specialist, right? But the first thing I want to tell you is that you can be the most brilliant person in the world, or in Malaysia, or in this room, or in this presentation, right? But it is not possible, okay? You are not immune from, you will not be insulated, you know, from financial risk. So this is lesson number 1, okay? And I know that this is in our culture and many cultures. I've done some research on this, right? Kita biasanya, I think in, at least di Malaysia lah, we don't discuss money, right? We don't like to discuss financial matters, right? That's why you hardly have occasions or situations in which, terus saya cerita dengan anak-anak lah. Now I'm dealing with my children, right? When I was young, right, I never had occasions in which my father would actually discuss money in front of the children, at least, you know. Any points, you know, in my childhood. Now, and the same thing is generally happening even today with me and my children. Right? I don't discuss money. I teach economics. I teach money, you know, money related matters in the university. I know story about John Blunt. I know many more stories like story of John Blunt, but we never do this, and that's because it's just so unpleasant to talk about money. So sorry lah kalau I kind of macam prick some of your inner discomfort, you know, when we start discussing this, right? But I think this is something that everyone should be aware of. Number 1 is, no matter how brilliant you are, how clever you are, how established you are, how much money you have, doesn't really matter, because even the king got screwed, right? Earlier, you see. So we can never insulate ourselves from financial risk, right? Okay. Now, the thing that puzzles economic historian, but of course, people speculated on the reason why. People kind of were puzzled. How could people like Sir Isaac Newton got drawn into this frenzy, feeding frenzy, right? So one explanation to that is, I'm just conveying to you one possible reason, which I think is, for me, the most convincing story, right? There were stories about his wife influencing him to start investing and all that, but I don't think those are serious explanations. But I think one of the most convincing and objective reason for this is because we, at its most, ourselves, at our most basic, I, I could, for lack of a better word, right? I just say like I just choose the term like at the most basic level, we are actually an emotional creature. Okay. Now, if any one of you is interested to know more about this, right, you can read some of the recent research findings in behavioral economics, you know, and those literature are actually accessible by anyone. They're not written in in complicated economic jargon. They are kind of simple and straightforward argument. So they were saying like, at the end of the day, you can be the most rational person, you can be very objective, you can use all the brain, but in the end, when it comes to decision making, emotion plays the final kind of macam role. So you can weigh, your brain can give you, okay, if you do A, this is what you're going to get. If you do B, this is what you get, and C, this is what you get. But in the end, decision is actually made emotionally. Now, I know that most of you say like, what? Is that really true? Well, go ahead and try to read up some of the research, and there were, I think, compelling evidence to show like, in the end, it is our emotion. Now, so some economic historian was saying like, most likely, and I think every one of us should admit this, right? We have in ourselves this this feeling of many types of feelings, right? But one of them is greed, right? So most people are saying that he was actually motivated by greed. Okay, so his brain may be telling him like, you know, this is a good investment, you should go for it and all that, and even the king has invested in the scheme and so forth. But in the final analysis, he must have been motivated by greed, right? Because you remember that he actually sold the shares initially at 20,000 pounds. But later, when he look around and he says like, oh, everybody is like gaining even more. So greed kind of motivated him to invest again, you know, and of course, in the end, he lost all his money. So beware of your emotion, especially greed when it comes to financial matters, right? So I think because people in the financial marketing business know that we are, inverted comma, greedy. It's just a matter of how much control you have on it. So they have different tricks in making sure that they would really work on our greed, you know, in making us decide in a way that may not be the most advantageous way ahead. And the final point here is, many people, I'm not sure about the audience, you know, in this presentation, but I think most people think that when, especially when when I was about to make my presentation, many people think like I'm going to talk about external factors that would lead to financial risk, personal financial risk. Okay, and of course there are many external factors or sources that will have some bearing on the kind of financial risk that we take. But I think if there is one take-home lesson that you want to take for today, just remember that your emotion actually can be the biggest source of risk instead of risk from outside, of course. Okay, thank you, Dr. Mauda. That's
Most
about it. I
welcome.
think I am almost
Yeah, we
done
still
with my
got room
time.
for
So
questions, insyaAllah, Dato.
boleh kalau ada.
Okay,
Ya,
boleh. I thought it is
boleh.
a very interesting talk that I enjoyed listening to the stories, and I think it could relate to us because being doctors, can we are actually not economists. We don't know how to evaluate investments and so forth, and sometimes we become a target to these financial advisors or even new investment schemes. So we have a question.